Hello, welcome back to the goalkeeper.com podcast. Three with you today is me, Hudspith, and the data guru, the man with the numbers, the facts, stats, and maths, our astronomer goalkeeper, Dr. John Harrison. John, how are you doing?
Hello, yeah, having a great time other than England getting knocked out. I'm all happy and ready to dive into another podcast.
No, indeed. Well, now we've all somewhat recovered from the disappointment of Saturday night. So to come in today's episode, we'll hear from England women's goalkeeper Carly Telford as she talks us through international camps, who she's been impressed by at the World Cup, and all other things to do with international goalkeeping. John will talk us through some of the best saves and worst errors of the latest round of fixtures, as well as updating us on the state of penalty cup. England are out, but the narrative continues. Roy Keane questions Jordan Pickford over France's first goal, but is he picking hairs over the number one's performance? Hugo Lloris turns up on the big stage once again, but remains perennially questioned. Should we be giving France's number one a little bit more respect? And finally, which brands still will us in Qatar, which heading back into the glove bag, and which could be getting their hands on the World Cup trophy? John's got the numbers from all the winners since latex was used in a major tournament. And there's all of this and more to come over the next 40 minutes or so. We mentioned England first and foremost. It was disappointing on Saturday. What do you make of goalkeeping in that game in general? We'll get into it a bit more detail later, but first and foremost, what were your kind of initial thoughts while watching the game?
I thought it was actually a really good game for goalkeepers. I thought both Pickford and Lloris had some big saves and made them, and they had some big decisions to come off their line and overall did well when doing that. Both of their distribution, I thought, was actually very tidy. I thought it was one of those games that gets defined by fine margins, and we'll get into the goals both keepers conceded later. But to be honest, I don't think there was too much to dig into in terms of poor goalkeeping there. I think it was all a great performance, and really, for me, it was probably the best game of the tournament so far, end to end, really electric. Just not a great result for England fans.
No, indeed, and we've seen a bit of keeper bashing as we've spoken about over the World Cup so far. But like you say, I think what that game showed us was that there were just some very good goals. We'll speak about Roy Keane's comments on Pickford's concession for France's first goal slightly later on. But overall, we saw Lloris really pulling out the stops. I think Pickford, personally, unlucky. I don't think he really could have done much more. And I think the same can be said for a lot of the goalkeepers that have gone out so far. I mean, I wouldn't say that Alisson necessarily, by eye, deserved to be heading home. I think the stats, we'll get into that slightly later. Quite, Andreas Noppert for the Netherlands, his first major tournament, and another one who I don't think really put, too many feet wrong, especially considering he's never actually made an international appearance before this World Cup. And likewise, we've seen some extraordinary goalkeeping from Emi Martinez once again, Dominik Livakovic for Croatia. But the international dynamic is unique for goalkeepers. And I spoke to Carly Telford last week about all things England, from her experiences on international camps with the women's team to how the likes of Jordan would have been preparing for the game on Saturday night.
So, Carly, obviously you've been involved in a number of major tournaments with England. Talk us through a bit about your experiences in an international camp. So if that's dealing with press, being away from home, how do you structure that dynamic?
Well, probably for the first few tournaments, I was really lucky. I had a roommate. So my roommate was Jill Scott, who's been like my best friend since I was like 12 years old. So roommate with your best mate. My first major tournament was China in 2007. Well, we just thought we were on holiday, basically, because we were a couple of kids who were both 18. That I was so far away from home and so different. We didn't have any intentions of playing. Obviously, I was third choice keeper. Jill was not just scraped in, but she was like one of the youngest in the squad. So we just kind of were there and just having a good time. So in regards to that how serious the tournament was, I just remember it being like amazing, like just the experience of being in such a different country. We got to stay on an island just outside of China for like a camp. We were playing golf in the water, like golf under the water. We went to like a big casino opening, and then we went to Shanghai and all the beautiful places in China. So that was a really cool experience. But then after that, the game elevated a little bit, and then you start getting, it was a bit more serious, and there was more chance of us. Jill actually played in that tournament because someone got injured, so she actually did play in China. So it got a bit more serious than what it was. But we're also not a big contender in terms of national team. I think we were outside the top 10 and stuff. But as we got better and went on, Euros, World Cups and stuff, we were serious contenders. So again, we had room. I was her roommate a lot of the time. We made sure we had good fun, but also like worked hard when we had to train. But my experiences have been nothing but great experiences, like winning the bronze medal in Canada, going to like World Cups in France, getting game time there, and obviously falling slightly short, which was obviously devastating, but we had a good group. We truly believed we were going to win it. And yeah, we just obviously come up short, but it's prepared, I think, the country and the team and what they went on to do in the Euros for something much better than what we did in that World Cup. So it was progressive. It has been progressive, I think, for the past 10, 15 years. And I feel blessed to have been involved in that progression as to where it's gone this summer. But yeah, camps can be, there's some hard camps in terms of, like, depends on who your manager was. And back in the day, there wasn't a belief in so much as having fun, bit of downtime, but mainly you're there to do a job. But now I think you just look at the men's teams, the importance of having that balance of not making it too stressful and strenuous on the players. You're in a different country, how important families are when you're so far away from home and stuff, that it's a lot different now when you go into international camps and what it probably has been in the past. And that's actually really, really nice, because you work hard, but you still got a little piece of home, or you still don't feel like too stressed, because being involved in those major tournaments when there's media and press and TV involved and social media, everyone kind of is waiting for you to fail or to mess up so they can talk about it, tweet about it. Generally, that's the English media and how they work. So for us to have success and for everyone to jump on board with that is huge. So I just hope that continues for however many years we're successful.
I mean, there's been a lot of coverage in terms of Southgate's own methods of cultivating a really good atmosphere inside the squad, on camps, obviously at Russia in 2018 at the Euros, and then now that seems to be continuing. But in terms of the goalkeepers union, you know, what will Jordan Pickford, in your eyes, be looking for from Martin Margetson, but also from his supporting goalkeepers, Nick Pope and Aaron Ramsdale, in terms of how they can best support his performance to number one?
I think this is like the really interesting thing for me, and it's how I think for young kids when you're growing up, it's something, it's so special to be part of, but it's so important to any team's success. I think if you have a good second, third goalkeeper, if you have that much depth, regardless whether you're international, whether you're League One, WSL, whatever you're working at, I think if your goalkeeping unit is solid, supports each other, pushes each other in the right direction, is able to have difficult conversations within the unit in terms of with the coach and with each other, I think genuinely you will find that those are the ones that are successful at the end of the season. So if you spoke to Edison at the end of the season, or Alisson at the end of the season when they won the Premier League, and he spoke about his teammates, his goalkeeper union, I can guarantee that they probably said they pushed him every day, they tested him, they were good guys, they looked after him, they stepped in and stepped up when they needed to if he was injured or he couldn't play. Because that's, I think, goalkeeping is so underrated in terms of how important you are, that if your goalkeeper is unhappy, doesn't feel supported, doesn't feel confident, is having to deal with stuff like how the goalkeeping unit works, whether it's the service isn't good enough, the goalkeeper behind you is constantly, not to put it in a bad way, bitching, knocking on the door all the time, not just being like, just staying in their lane and working hard. I think that can have an effect on you. And that's not to say that ones that aren't successful have bad goalkeeping units, but I just feel like it's such an integral part to doing something where you're in such an intense environment, whether that's over 6 weeks and it's a major tournament, or whether it's 11 months in a season, because you remember you're working with these guys or girls every single day. So I think Pickford, he sat down with Josh Denzel and his little, they do a little Lions thing. And I think Josh asked him the question, like, what's the goalkeeper union like? Because obviously everyone wants to know, because it usually looks fun as well. But I think that Popey and Aaron have just supported not just him as a footballer, but as a person. That's another thing. If you can find how each other work and support each other in their ways, they're just huge, because at the end of the day, everyone wants to play, like whether you're outfielder or goalkeeper. But generally, if you're a goalkeeper, that whoever's number one, you're not going to get like 10 minutes here and 20 minutes there as an outfielder might. You're generally going to play every game. So those two goalkeepers, unless something drastically goes wrong, which again, touch wood, you never hope does, you're not going to get any minutes. So why not enjoy it while you're out there? So what can you learn out there? What do you want from the goalkeeping coach, from your players? How can we make it fun? But how can we also make sure that at the end of it, they all want to win the World Cup? Like Aaron and Popey are going to be walking off with gold medals as World Cup winners if they can make sure like Pickford's on top of his game, but also if they needed to be called upon, that they're ready. So you can't be moping around, you can't be disappointed, of course you can be privately, but I think you've got to have that 1 or 2 days where it is what it is, I've just got to crack on now. And it sounds like they've got a great unit, a great union. It sounds like the goalkeeping coach, when I spoke to Darren a little bit about him, and when I've spoke to other goalkeepers that have worked with him before, he's very much like game related, everything's game. But it is though, like when you're on like, you could be a little bit more strategic when you have a full season. You can work on different things. You're training every day. But when you're in an environment, you just need to make sure you're ready for games. So it's all about what do the opposition do? What are the traits or trends that you can look out for? How can you best serve the ball? How can you got to deal with a lot of crosses, so let's work on a lot of crossing. What are the triggers? I don't know, do they take shots from distance, so you're dealing with balls through bodies? All that kind of stuff. That's what they'll sit and discuss and then work on in the build up into the France game. Obviously they'll probably work on Mbappe cutting in from the left side and how he wraps the ball left and right, his body position, where you want your defenders, what part of the goal you want them to defend, like all those kind of intricate details that you can work on because you're just focusing on one game at a time. Whereas, like saying in a league environment, you've got time to develop on, I feel weak at this, let's do this for like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday, Saturday, you focus on a game for Sunday. So you can play around with it a little bit more. But yeah, I just think as a union, it's so important that you support each other. You can and deal with your disappointments and disregards and things that you'll find frustrating separately away from the grass, because the grass is where you do your work. And I think if you're dealing with your own frustrations, you can't work effectively either because you're thinking about other things. So I don't think then you develop as a person or a player. So you're only hurting yourself, and then you start hurting the team as well, because it's obvious. You can see when someone's unhappy as well. So I just think there's ways of dealing with it, and I think teaching that from a young age as a goalkeeper is really important, because I think if you are number one, there's a way of dealing with the players that aren't playing as well, and then you have to tread carefully, because you need those players. Without those players, you don't have the union, you don't have the support, and you don't have what you need to be a better goalkeeper. So I think regardless whether where you are in what stage, I think there's conversations to be had at a young age, because there are going to be difficult points in your career, and it's just how you deal with them. So I think it's really important. But I just do think the boys have such a good bond in there at the minute, and they're all playing well. Like say, Pope's playing well too. Ramos playing really well at Arsenal, and Pickford, you can argue that he's been up and down this season, but when it comes to a big game, the boy produces, so you can't argue with it. So I think that their little unit would be a lot of fun to watch and be involved in, if I'm honest.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting at a World Cup or any major tournament, because you're taking a bunch of number ones who are undisputed at their respective clubs, not just with England, with Spain, with Simon, Raya both playing in the Premier League, and then also, Simon obviously in La Liga, Raya and Sanchez both in the Premier League, Alisson and Ederson with Brazil, and then obviously Taffarel, who's coaching Alisson at Liverpool, but then coming back into the kind of national dynamic with Weatherton as well, and a number of other nations with a similar situation. It's really interesting to see the kind of depth and quality we've had with goalkeepers this World Cup, but then at the same time, you take someone like the Netherlands and Noppert, who is a fantastic example of how you just never know what's going to be around the corner. Barely made 50 appearances at domestic level, but actually turned up in the big moments, and is now potentially taking Netherlands all the way through, depending on how they get on. In light of a more kind of international picture, what have been the goalkeeping moments you've been most impressed with so far at the World Cup?
You got to look to Chesney. I think that he stood up huge for Poland, and he's definitely had his critics over the past, however many years. And I just think when you listen to, especially the commentators are always outfielders, aren't they? So they don't really shouldn't be conceding at his near post, shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't be doing that. And you just think, I'd love to put you in goal and just fire shots at you, and you tell me what I shouldn't be doing. So there's a bit of that, but I think so Chesney's really stood up. I think that I really liked, was it the Brazilian guy brought on the older guy, did he, for a second half or something? And I thought that was really nice. I think that the appreciation, I think that obviously the team and the manager has for what he does as a player and a person, and what he's done for however many years, I think that was a really nice moment, and that's not thought of enough. I think that Pickford's had some really huge moments, which has kind of gone under the radar because the boys, the outfielders, have been doing so well. But I think if we concede in those moments, the game's totally different. Big saves, big moments, and I think that's been huge. I'm trying to think what games I've been watching and who I've really enjoyed watching. What was the game where it's the guy with the longest? Who does he play for? He's got the. Is it Mexican? The Mexican goalkeeper?
Ochoa, yeah.
Obviously
his last World Cup, yeah.
Yeah, it's just nice to see him go out, and he looked like he was having fun, to be honest. And there was one of the games, I think he made a load of saves, didn't he? And he was really thriving. But I just think it's been really nice. The goalkeeping's been, again, the penalties have been huge. Jesse's got to be the highlight of that. And I think consistently, obviously, you can't go away from Alisson. And like I say, the Dutch goalkeeper stood up when people didn't expect him to. But I think for me, Pickford's done a Pickford, hasn't he? And he's just been super consistent. You just can't go away from. I think that any goalkeeper that is successful they're just the most consistent.
No,
But that is the bread and butter, I think, of any elite professional athlete. You just is your consistency. And I think for England, yes, you can argue, same with Maguire, you can argue club, they have their moments, the hairy moments, but I've just enjoyed Pickford because he's a bit of a nutter, like typical Sunderland Raji, you want to call him. But like you say, he just loves the game so much. You can just see like he's like a kid, like, and he just wants not to concede ever. Like, and it's just so nice when he's shouting and screaming at everyone, but he still turns up in the big moments and makes some huge saves for his country. So I'm just really enjoying watching him in a minute and thrive.
So John, Carly picked out Wojciech Szczesny as goalkeepers that she was being, really impressed by at the World Cup so far. Obviously, Poland are now out, but we have seen some extraordinary goalkeeping beyond Szczesny's penalty heroics. Pickford against Senegal, fantastic saves, and likewise Alisson against South Korea. But out of these two moments of magic, so to speak, goalkeeping-wise, what were the numbers saying in terms of how expected they were to be saved, John?
Yeah, no, indeed. So Pickford's save so far was the best save of the knockout rounds, and it was quite ironic, really, that both the referee and the commentators missed it at the time. Neither a corner was given, nor did any commentators really mention anything. They just claimed that Sarr had ballooned it over the bar, but actually the replays showed Pickford when he got out and spread like that, it flicked off his forearm and went over the bar. And for me, it's a wonderful save. It goes in about 75% of the time. So that means it's not an impossible save, but more often than not, it's hitting the back of the net. And the great thing about our model at Goalkeeper XG is we can calculate how Pickford's positioning and decision-making to engage and spread in this situation affected the goal probability. So as you can see, it was about 75% chance, but the model calculating post Pickford rushing out and spreading like he did actually drops this massively. And so his save probability goes from 26% up to 67% when he does that. So it shows just what a great and effective action the engage and spread is for close range central one-on-ones like this. So for me, this was just a great display of goalkeeping decision making and making the ball just hit you. I imagine if the commentators had seen it, they'd probably say something like, Pickford did well to get out, but it just hit him. And sort of disparaging it. Whereas for me, he's done everything perfectly because he's made the save actually quite easy for himself. Because once you're out and spread and it just hits your forearm, there's not much control you have of it. But it was all the decision making before that made that final moment just easy and make an expected save probability shot of 26% look straightforward. And this was at 0-0, by the way, if people don't quite remember the game. So this is humongous in terms of the context of England getting through the Senegal fixture unscathed.
No, indeed. I mean, Pickford made another very, very good save shortly after that gained all the plaudits, got all the photos that we've seen strewn around social media so far. I mean, I agree with you, John. I scarcely remember hearing anyone about this save, and I think a lot of people thought he had just missed, to be honest. Yeah. It'd just be blazed over the bar. Obviously not the case. And I mean, to have a 25.8% expected save probability is actually quite remarkable. I mean, that's tiny in comparative terms to a lot of other saves we've seen so far at this tournament. Some people say 1 in 4, but in reality, you can't look at things like, I mean, data takes us so far, and as Goalkeeper XG shining a light on, a number of perhaps unknown things that coaches and analysts aren't yet seeing in goalkeeping. But nonetheless, we think about it as a 1 in 4 chance. But at the same time, to do that in an international fixture with the pressure that's on you with the World Cup, narrative playing out with the TV cameras, with the crowd and what have you, that is that you work on in training for weeks, for months on end. That, quick decision off the line, the shape, the bravery, these are things that are the result of years and years and years of repetitive training, of repetitive mental conditioning to be able to come out and make these sort of saves. It's really impressive by Pickford. And I mean, Alisson again was another one who we saw really pull out the stops against South Korea. Obviously, the Brazilians did go through in this game, but were knocked out later on. Slightly higher expected save probability for this one, John. But talk us through a bit what Alisson was doing here.
Yeah, so this is Hwang of Wolves gets the ball about 30 yards out roughly and just hammers a really powerful drive. So we clocked it in at Goalkeeper XG as traveling at 59 miles an hour, which is above the sort of average pace of a shot in the World Cup. And it was just arrowing into the top corner, as you can see. And Alisson's wonderful footwork, got a top hand up and just flicks it over the bar. And yeah, for me, I think he made it look quite easy. And the way he just got up off the ground, kind of nonchalant, again, the score was 1-0, I believe, to Brazil at the time. So he's stopped South Korea getting back in the game with this save. And again, the model loves it. It thinks because of the speed and the flight and trajectory of the ball, actually, this is going to beat a keeper, again, a little bit like the Pickford save, about 75% of the time. And Alisson's made it look like a sort of straightforward save because of his footwork and technique. And we discussed this a lot at Goalkeeper XG. And that's the different techniques. So if you're using 2 hands, 1 hand, cup, W, scoop, all the different kinds of things, foot saves, all of that, it affects the probability of making a save. And we find for shots like this, so dipping, swerving shots that are going across the keeper in high into the net, use of the top hand is vital. And that's backed up by biomechanics as well. And I've done plenty of threads on this on Twitter, and there'll soon be articles on the goalkeeper.com website about it. But using the top hand here basically allows the goalkeeper not to fight against gravity, because they're already moving across that way. They can push it over the bar with their dive momentum. Whereas if Alisson had have gone with his bottom hand here, he might have struggled to push the ball over the bar just because his dive momentum would no longer be aligned with the way his hand was moving. So for me, this is a classic save of great shot stopping technique decision making. So the choice Alisson makes to use his top hand makes it easier. And so many times I'll have seen shots like this where I guess pundits would say, it's where a goalkeeper goes with their bottom hand and ends up just tipping it slightly and it just goes into the roof of the net. But Alisson's technique here meant that he could easily put it out for a corner.
So fantastic save here by Alisson, John. One we've seen him make, a type of save we've seen him make for Liverpool quite often. I mean, Alisson is one that definitely use of the bottom hand biomechanically is not always optimal. Sometimes it is close range, short reaction time. Bottom hand tends to be more of a natural reaction, but in this situation, Alisson has definitely gone with the right hand, so to speak. But I want to move on to obviously conceded so far to balance things out a bit. Funny story behind the picture about to bring up on our screen. John and I were out at dinner and we were watching the Switzerland versus Portugal match, and we saw this goal go in, and we said to each other on the spot, "That's definitely one that's going in the podcast next week." It was picture perfect for some high expected save probability, John, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, indeed. So if you haven't seen the goal, basically Leao gets the ball just inside the box and just tries to curl it into the far top corner, but doesn't catch it quite right. So goalkeeper XG, we find it only struck at about 48 miles an hour. 48 miles an hour, which is slightly less than the average. And it goes very centrally, as you can see from the still photo. And I think Sommer just sort of gets his feet too heavily planted, gets a little bit low in his set, and just gives up on it, basically. So, he doesn't try and go for it, and he just watches it sort of curl past him. And at goalkeeper XG, we find this shot's saved about 20% of the time. It's a goal 20% of the time. It's saved about 81% of the time. So, it's not too kind on Sommer here. And we think most keepers would have moved their feet better and got 2 hands and probably palmed this away. But sadly not for Sommer. And it was in a 6-1 defeat, which is not great for him. He's been a great goalkeeper for Switzerland over the years. But not one of his finest moments here. And it can sometimes happen to goalkeepers.
It was interesting, John, because it looks slightly deceptive. I could understand how someone was caught out here. But, like you say, it's difficult because our perception compared to our action is essentially the mechanism on which goalkeeping works. Half of it is, as football is generally, the majority of the game is mental. I think it's easy to see how you can be deceived here in terms of the type of shot that someone was facing. But I think also you've got to consider that Switzerland were getting battered. They're also already, I think, at this point, 4 or 5-1 down. And these things do impact goalkeepers' perception. This kind of toll, having that heaviness, that kind of weightiness in terms of being that, that heavily down in a major fixture is always going to impact decision making. But someone wasn't the only one. Senegal obviously went out against England in the round of 16. And Mendy, I think this was a goal that wasn't necessarily obviously any sort of error, but actually when you put the numbers behind it, you see that Mendy really should have been doing better here.
Yeah, no, indeed. So basically this was because of the trajectory of the shot and the speed of the shot why the model thinks that it should be saved about 82% of the time. So when you watch the clip back, Henderson, after a cutback, sort of side foots it pretty centrally and at about 42 miles an hour, and it beats Mendy, but only just. So you can see here as he's diving, he almost gets fingertips to it, but just not quite enough. And the reason, looking back on it, that you think he probably could save it is this little part of the screenshot up here in the top left corner. He's just way out of position. He's far too high up and probably a little bit too far over to his right, meaning that when Henderson does strike it, he just has no reaction time to get down. If he could have been And this is why goalkeeper coaches train this all the time. You see, or if you watch the England videos, they'll train cutbacks and keepers starting high, ready to claim the cross. And when they realise they can't get to the cutback, back off near to their line, 1 or 2 yards off their line, and maximise reaction time. And Mendy doesn't do that here, which means that the shot beats him for pace, even though it's not particularly quick. You can imagine if Mendy was 2 yards maybe further back, he'll just dive, get on top of it, catch it, probably get 2 hands on it. But like you were saying before, in a big moment, like one of Senegal's first knockout games in a while in a World Cup, you can easily see why a goalkeeper can lose a little bit of judgment in those split seconds and end up too high and too far off the line and basically give themselves not a great chance of making a save.
Well, speaking about split-second decisions, John, especially big pressure, penalties have come into focus recently, and we've seen a number of shootouts already, in many of which goalkeepers have been the heroes. I mean, we saw a fantastic performance from Livakovic, for example, Emi Martinez putting being a big part of Argentina going through. But over the World Cup eras, and this is going all the way back to 1982 when stats were first available for penalty shootouts, we've actually seen a general increase in the last few years since VAR introduced, or the introduction of VAR and referees introducing slightly revised penalty rules around goalkeepers staying on their line and what have you. An increased number of saves that goalkeepers are actually making from penalties. So, John, pretty simple question. Is it the case that new rules are actually making goalkeepers better at saving penalties?
Yeah, so it's a hard one to analyse because you don't actually get many penalties and penalty shootouts at every World Cup. But you can definitely see from this graphic here that over the years it sort of hovers around the 18% mark. We occasionally have these good years like 2002, but then you occasionally have years like 1986 where it drops below. But really, in the sort of pre-VAR era, it's hovered around that number. But post-VAR, we had the highest ever World Cup save percentage in 2018 with about 24%. And then this year, we're on almost 30% of all on-target penalties getting saved, which is like crazily high. And that led me to sort of look into, well, what's going on here? So if you actually plot all the 52 penalties on a graphic like this, it was a big pain for me to plot Kane's there. That did make me sad, but it had to be done. But you can see if you have 52 penalties, the expected goals before the ball's even kicked, just based on how many penalties hit the back of the net, is about 41. So you'd have expected 41 goals to have happened. But actually, we've only seen at this tournament 33. So where have those extra goals gone? We've basically got 8 goals too few. And many people will have watched the penalty shootouts, watched the penalties, and they'll know that, well, the placement and power hasn't been great on a lot of them. And our model at Goalkeeper XG finds that. So it thinks that actually only 39 penalties should have been scored given how they were placed. So that number does drop down, but that's only 2 goals explained. There's another 6 extra saves effectively that the keepers have made that we haven't explained yet. And you can see it's pretty evenly spread between left and right. It's not like all of the takers are going one way or something silly like that. But what we found really is that goalkeepers are overperforming. And that's probably one of the only explanations. It could maybe be a hot streak. So they've saved 6 more than they should have. But maybe if we look at a bigger sample size, actually they're going to be conceding. We're going to have some penalty shootouts with like 11-10s and things like that, where not many saves get made and it'll even out. But to be honest, I think that that's not quite the right explanation, and potentially maybe analytics and VAR have actually helped the goalkeepers, as you mentioned before, because when we look into it, as we saw, the 2018 World Cup was the second highest penalty save on record at a World Cup penalty save percentage. So potentially it's this introduction of making goalkeepers stay on their line for longer that's making it harder for strikers, because one, not only do they not jump off their line and cut their reaction time and make it harder for them to save it and the ball might squirm under them, they're also making sure their dive is really technically tidy. And we've got an article about this all on goalkeeper.com if you want to go and check that out if you want to learn more. But basically the new technique and style of horizontally shifting on your line and then doing a big power step dive to one side is potentially actually helping goalkeepers make saves. And it's something that goalkeeper.com and Goalkeeper XG will keep looking at for the years to come and keep tracking it. But it just might look like many people thought that refs being stringent on goalkeepers staying on their lines might make it harder for keepers. But so far, the statistics have shown that keepers are actually excelling. And maybe we should applaud goalkeeper coaches and goalkeepers, because it might just be a case of it should have made it harder for them, but their great work and dedication has actually sort of found a little niche in there at the moment that's allowed them to excel. But yeah, it's great for us to see at goalkeeper.com that keepers have been absolutely nailing penalty shootouts this year.
Well, I mean, adapting to your environment, John, it's how humanity has evolved. So I suppose goalkeepers are going in a similar trajectory. We also see, obviously, goalkeepers starting slightly behind their line. I think Courtois against Canada back in the earlier rounds, his save for Alphonso Davies, again, starting slightly behind the line and make sure that back foot he could still step, but the back foot still is on the line, which is interesting because you then get that power in. And like you say, being technically tidy is a massive part of potentially why goalkeepers are making more saves here. But one goalkeeper that did not have to face penalty shootout this year, unlike the last World Cup, was Jordan Pickford. That's because, unfortunately, England are heading home, as we all know. Now, the France game, as we mentioned at the start, John, was pretty unique in goalkeeping terms. I think the goal we're about to see here, France's first, is an interesting example of where you can make very particular technical kind of pick-outs from the concession. Roy Keane commented on this being one that Pickford apparently should do better on. And whilst we do kind of call pundits out every now and again about their kind of lack of goalkeeping insight and proper analysis, some people were saying that Keane may have a case. Now, I think personally it's quite pedantic, and I'm not sure that Pickford really could have done better here. It's definitely not a mistake. We're not using that terminology. But actually, in terms of the numbers behind it, John, we find a very, very highly powered shot with a lot of shot speed. But there is a case, I suppose, to an extent of Pickford's movement and positioning in terms of potentially being able to get a slightly stronger hand on the ball.
Yeah, no, indeed. So the first thing you should say is, this is an incredible goal, really well struck, and less than a yard away from the post. So it's very accurate, and we clock it in at about 61 miles an hour in our model, which is way above the average shot speed from that distance. It's going to make it really hard to save. So our expected saves model puts this at around 25%. So again, it's something that can be saved. It's not like impossible. It's not like a 1% or anything like that. But this is not something that gets saved all the time. It's not something where a pundit could go and say, "Oh, I bet a decent keeper saves that." That is not quite true. Yes, if Pickford's footwork was maybe a bit tidier, but it does come through Bellingham's legs. I think given what happens there, as you can see from the clip, Pickford does very well to move his feet, get across and get a strong dive in. I think probably the case is the keepers that make this save are probably the Courtois and the Popes, and they're just the keepers that have naturally bigger frames, and potentially they won't make this save every time because their footwork might be slower. But I think what doesn't help Pickford here is just his frame, because it's one of those where if you get your steps in, get your dive across, and you're still just not quite don't have quite enough length sort of to get a hand on the ball and a strong hand and tip it around the post, it's always going to be an issue. So I think for me, it's a hard one for pundits because it's one of those, I think, without the models and without the numbers, without knowing the shot speed and how often shots into the bottom corner from this distance get saved, it's hard to analyse. But I'm pretty happy with what our model outputs, and this is basically a 75% chance of it being a goal. So for me, there's no real blame attached to Pickford. That is just not one of his areas of strength. Like maybe if it was Pope and we were picking Pope for his long-range shot-stopping ability, maybe you then sort of question like, oh, why is he in the team? But Pickford isn't in the team to pull saves like this out. He's in to pull out the one-on-one saves that we talked about before. He's in for his distribution, and he's in for his experience and leadership. So for me, I wouldn't really be questioning Pickford. You've picked Pickford to be your keeper. You've got to then accept that sometimes if someone hits a screamer into the bottom corner, he's not the type of keeper that's going to be able to pull out that save a lot of the time just because of his frame.
No, indeed. I mean, you used the word there, screamer, John. I think what we've all got to remember as goalkeepers and non-goalkeepers that we can just give strikers credit for good goals. Likewise, we can just give goalkeepers credit for great saves. And I think this is a situation where, yes, if we want to be really, really kind of pickety about it, then we can maybe say there could have been slightly more foot movement. But like you say, it would have made it an extraordinary save. It wouldn't have made it less of a mistake. And the word mistake is poorly used in this context. Pickford's done nothing wrong here. He's reacted to what he can see, which is ball coming through bodies. And he's been beaten by a powerful and very, very well-placed shot. I think we just need to remember that we don't always have to try and find a technical kind of mistake or error in the goalkeeper. And I can see Lee Dixon just about refraining from saying anything controversial about Pickford on the commentary on Saturday evening. But nonetheless, Pickford was only one of the goalkeepers obviously involved in the game. Hugo Lloris, his opposing number one, put in a really fantastic performance, I think. And Lloris became France's most capped player with 143 caps on Saturday evening. Somebody who I felt has always been perpetually underrated, always called out for errors, always kind of blamed, I think, a lot of the time with Tottenham. And, you know, Lloris has made errors for Tottenham. There's no denying about that. I think the phrase that was used on Saturday in commentary was that there's an error in his locker room. Whilst I don't really like that phrase personally, it is fair to say that Lloris has made some blunders for Spurs. But nonetheless, we see a goalkeeper who's very, very athletic. We see a goalkeeper with fantastic cross-confidence. We see a goalkeeper who is a very, very good shot stopper majority of the time. Of course, as we see on the screen, numbers this season aren't quite reflecting that. But nonetheless, John, I think Lloris needs some more respect on his name.
No, definitely. Like for the past 5 or 6 years, he's been one of the best shot stoppers in the Premier League, consistently saving way above average. Like people know his sort of weaknesses, and that sometimes he's erratic when coming for crosses and will miss a few. And we'll get onto that in a second when we look at his game against England. And they know, again, sweeping wise, sometimes he's a great sweeper, clears up tidily. Sometimes he just comes out when he doesn't need to and will end up getting beaten. But that's sort of the nature of his game. And for the past 4 or 5 years, his shot stopping has well outweighed any of the mistakes he's made. And he's been a top keeper for France and for Tottenham. But interestingly, this year, going into the game, he's sort of waned a little bit in his powers. He's basically been about a league average goalkeeper. So you can see here that his overall value in goals, which is our model at goalkeeper XG, that takes into account every single action he does. So every cross catch, through ball sweep, every pass he tries to make, every shot he tries to save. We look at all of that and figure out, if you put an average keeper in goal, how many goals would Tottenham in this case have conceded, more or less? And we get him as basically -1, which is roughly average, but really, he's probably cost them a goal versus having an average Prem keeper. And that's normally because his shot stopping value is normally +1, 2, or 3 in the goals by the sort of halfway stage. And this year it wasn't. But the beauty of goalkeeping is you can be on pretty average, rocky form for your club, but then in a big World Cup game, you can turn it all around and put in a performance that basically gets your country through.
And I mean, in the top left on our screen now, we can see the save from Harry Kane earlier in the game, which, John, I know your numbers recorded as pretty much the best save that was made in that game. I want to talk about Lloris and crosses, because here is where we see bravery, it's where we see athleticism, it's where we see agility, it's where we see fantastic handling, and that's not to be forgotten. All to have the bravery to come and do that in the dying minutes of a game where France needed their goalkeeper to come and relieve some pressure. It's not something that just happens automatically. It's not something that is done without any kind of work behind it or kind of mental work behind it, especially. And Lee Dixon commented that a goalkeeper of any quality is going to come for that, referring to the image in the bottom left, which is the second to last cross that Lloris came for in the game in the 92nd minute. But to come and take that pressure off your defence is something that's really invaluable to any defensive unit. Because we've got to remember that a goalkeeper, although is alone, is also part of a wider defensive strategy and often offensive strategy likewise. And in this situation, John, Lloris has really pulled out the bag, not only on crossing, but on shot stopping and really in virtually every other area of his game.
Yeah, no, indeed. Like, Lloris had an exceptional game overall. And for doing that in a knockout game, when you're breaking the caps record for your country, and all the pressure that's on him, and he's had an indifferent season, that is true. Like, one game doesn't change that, but it just shows how beautiful football and goalkeeping can be, because he can then be the hero, and everyone forgets what's sort of gone before it. But yeah, as you said, that save on the Kane deflected shot looping into the top corner was incredible. Our model basically has it as a 50-50. Like, half the time the keeper gets their footwork wrong and doesn't manage to get strong hands onto it and palms it into the side netting. Or maybe even just doesn't even attempt it because the deflection completely wrong foots them. And then, we've got that save against Bellingham, the volley from the edge of the box, which was struck viciously. And while it was straight down the middle, did require 2 hands to tip over. And you've seen those so many times. Keeper gets fingertips and it's in the back of the net. And then the one-on-one save against Kane, which I think a lot of people forgot just because it was so early in the game, did super well to get out and close it down and smother. Potentially Kane will be a bit annoyed with himself, because if he'd have lifted it slightly, you can see there, and this is why at Goalkeeper XG we always want to look at optimum techniques, and just because you save it doesn't necessarily mean you did the best thing possible, because here Lloris does give a big gap over his body, and if Kane had have been able, I think it hits his ribs and bounces out, so if Kane could have lifted it a few centimetres more, he gets the goal. Whereas obviously if Lloris came out and blocked, there'd have been no gap and he'd have made the save. But still, regardless of suboptimal technique, it still requires Lloris to get out, get close to Kane and make a barrier and make the save in the big moment. So that was top class from him. And as we can see at the bottom of the screen, if we look at his distribution, sweeping, cross-claiming, shot-stopping, add it all up, if you put an average goalkeeper in goal for France, like an average top-flight goalkeeper, they're probably conceding another goal. And given Kane missed his penalty, that's basically the difference between England winning 3-2 and France winning 2-1. So look, huge performance from the captain, Lloris. And one thing we should mention is, and this is again going back to the nature of goalkeeping, Lloris did miss a cross from a corner, and as you can see in that sort of bottom middle image, and Harry Maguire had a header which was then cleared off the line by a France defender. And that's one of those moments that if that header goes in from Maguire, suddenly everyone's talking about Lloris in a negative light. And I think one thing at Goalkeeper XG that we do is, well, we'll model that, and the model will know that Lloris has basically turned, I think it is a 8% chance for Maguire into a 30% chance, and that's just happened not to go in. But we'll only penalise him the difference between those two numbers. We won't, like some people I've seen, if that goes in, that's an error leading to a goal, so they penalise him a whole goal. And if it doesn't go in, they don't say anything. We're not like that at all. We sort of take the nuance into account and realise that even if that went in from Maguire, we wouldn't penalise Lloris a whole goal, because he hasn't actually cost his team that. He's just cost his team the difference in the probability. And that's probably why people like Lee Dixon or Roy Keane or whatever, when they look at Lloris, will say, oh, he's got an error in him, because he sometimes does get it wrong. But when you're going to come for a lot of crosses, sometimes it'll be great, like the 2 in the 90th minute that basically took all the pressure off France, and sometimes it'll go wrong. But the worst mistake of all for me is just not coming for any cross, because then you're just piling pressure on your defence. And you can imagine how England's tails would have been up if Lloris wasn't coming for those crosses and we were bombing balls in the box and getting chance after chance.
But Lloris could make it 2 consecutive World Cups in a row in theory, where Royce are lifting the trophy. And we'll come on to in a second, we'll see the most successful glove brand at the World Cup in its entirety. But at the moment, let's just have a look at who's still in the tournament in Qatar, and likewise who's heading through to semi-finals. We've got Allsport, Adidas and Royce are the 3 brands that are going through in terms of starting goalkeepers. And then Puma and Renat are bringing up the rear in terms of who's on the bench for respective nations. But Allsport at the moment still currently have the largest number of goalkeepers in total at the World Cup. And I mean, Morocco's Yassine Bono has been outstanding, hasn't he, John, so far?
Yeah, no, incredible. He's only conceded 1 goal, and it was an own goal. He's been pretty tidy from crosses. Like, I know people will probably complain he punches too much, but actually, if you're punching it clear of danger while you don't regain possession, at least he's not causing more issues than necessary. So I think he's done great in that regard. And yeah, he was a shootout hero against Spain. I think he's done brilliantly. And I think Allsport will be very proud to have him on their brand, given he's basically the lone goalkeeper now flying the flag for them. So yeah, it will be very interesting to see if Allsport could get their hands on the World Cup. That would be crazy for Morocco and for all of Africa if they can manage that.
I mean, John, an Allsport Royce final will be a spectacle to behold for any sort of glove collectors. That is a traditional goalkeeping battle going right back to some of the earliest brands who use latex on gloves. And I mean, if we just go onto the slide about which brands have featured in World Cups the most and likewise lifted the World Cup the most, we see Roche coming out on top with a selection of goalkeepers. Adidas there with Barthez and Neuer, Allsport with Zoff, and a few others, and likewise Puma and Reebok. Reebok obviously a brand. I don't think I know any goalkeepers nowadays that are wearing Reebok gloves. I'm not sure if they even still produce them, being totally honest with you. We'll get our glove gurus at goalkeeper.com to verify those facts, so don't worry about that. But I mean, I really think Roche have got a very strong claim to making that number even higher than it is with Lloris this year.
Yeah, no. When I looked into this, I was very interested to see who would come out on top, because it was just something I hadn't really clocked. But yeah, Roche are leading the way, basically through dominance in the early period of latex gloves, with the German World Cup winner, the Argentinian World Cup winner, and then 2 Brazilian World Cup winners. But yeah, Roche haven't won it in a while. But it would be nice to see if Lloris could lift the trophy for them, or even Livakovic of Croatia. They've got 2 in the pot, whereas Adidas will be looking to try and claim second spot if Martinez can get his hands on that trophy. And Allsport, if crazily Morocco could, Allsport will push themselves closer to Roche at the top. And Allsport will probably be fretting a little bit in the fact that they sort of let Hugo Lloris go from their brand. So when Lloris lifted the last World Cup, he was with Allsport, but now he's moved over to Roche, so could further extend their lead. So I think it's a very interesting one with all the goalkeepers there. And one brand that is notoriously sort of missing, I guess, is Nike, who we've discussed as part of the sort of big 5 before in previous videos. And with Brazil and Alisson Becker going out, it looks like their wait to get their hands on a trophy, their gloves, I should say, on a trophy is going to go on.
And I mean, in a wider sense, are are losing conscious decision from the Brown. They're taking obvious reasons. You know, Boots G3 could have been to behold. But nonetheless, John, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Not much more until the begin on Tuesday. To all of those watching, thank you very much. And to all those listening, likewise. And with Glove, that's goalkeeper.com. See you later.